Hi. If you can't hear me, raise your hand, because I have a habit of not speaking clearly or standing too close or too far. I never know. Anyways, before I start tonight, I just wanted to give a very short, brief commercial for the new online map at BC Marine Trails. If you have not had a chance to check it out, it is exceptional. It's really worth playing into. And it takes a little bit of time to get used to it and stuff. The really good tools are available to people who become members. And I think that the membership is $30 or $35 a year. It's worth it. Thank you. Our presenters tonight are known by a lot of the paddlers here, because they've been paddling for years on various trips and stuff. Richard Weir and Helen Davis, both with Masters of Science, and are registered professional biologists, plus are seasoned kayakers. With over 35 years of experience, both have dedicated their careers to studying the animals through their consulting firm, Artemis Wildlife Consultants. And they've got a really neat website, so if you get a chance, check it out. That's Artemis Consultants, Wildlife Consultants. In this engaging talk, they'll explore the wildlife kayakers might encounter along BC shores and offer tips on identifying species and understanding their beachside habits. So, Richard and Helen, please join us. Thank you.
Have you broken it? It's on the screen. We'll get it started.
I'll just pull this one out.
All right, I'm going to hold this next to me because it's just easier for people to hear.
Sorry.
Here we go. All right, thanks for the intro. My name's Rich. I'm a wildlife biologist and a kayaker. Interesting combination. Thanks everyone for coming to our little presentation. It's going to be a pretty informal kind of introduction to the many of the different species of carnivores that you might encounter while you're out paddling in coastal BC. Helen and I are going to try to provide a bit of an overview, a bit more background on the carnivores that call coastal BC home, and including why they're there, a bit about their fascinating lives that they lead that you might get a glimpse of, and some final info on how you can avoid having some real issues or encounters, negative encounters with them while you're out paddling. So a bit about us. Although Helen and I spend quite a bit of time on the water in our boats, we're both very firmly terrestrial biologists. I'm probably one of the few people around who, I didn't want to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. I wanted to actually be a wildlife biologist. So both Helen and I work on a bunch of different species of carnivores kind of throughout British Columbia. But we thought tonight it might be fun to just kind of meld together these two aspects of our lives, wildlife biology and kayaking, and just provide some stories and some more information about the various species that you might see while you're out paddling. So when to most people, when I say carnivore, they tend to think of an animal like this. You're not going to see many jaguars paddling along coastal BC, thankfully. But for the purposes of our talk, I'm going to talking about carnivores as a family of mammals. So there's, I think, 5 or 6 ones that we have in BC that we're going to talk about. There's the cats, like lynx and the cougars. There's the bear family, bears. The dog family, which includes wolves. We've got raccoons. Where are we? There we go. And the best family of all the carnivores is the weasel family, which you're not gonna, people, don't have great feelings toward weasels, but I'm hoping I'm gonna change that tonight with some exciting stories I'm gonna tell, because I like weasels. So you'll notice that there are a few the big sea carnivores that are missing from this list that we're not going to talk about because, as I said, Helen and I are terrestrial people. We're not going to talk about sea lions, which are carnivores, or seals, otherwise known as water sausages. I love this photo. Even though we do admit they are carnivores that you will see while you're paddling, but because they are entirely aquatic, we're not going to talk about them. So which of these animals can you expect to encounter while you're out paddling the coast of BC? So I'm going to start off with the biggest, and I say best, group of carnivores, the members of the weasel family. Now, weasels get a bad rap. They are not, as depicted here, vicious killers waiting to attack you in great packs, unless maybe you're a mouse. You know, they do eat mice, or maybe a snowshoe hare. You know, these weasels do kill for a living, but they are an incredibly tenacious group of animals. That's a stoat on the back of a green-backed woodpecker, I think, somewhere in the UK. They're small, but they're mighty. You would be advised to not mess with them. So, full disclosure, I love this group of animals. They occur in most of the ecosystems in BC, from the oceans to the high alpine grasslands. Yeah, they're not as big and feisty and flashy like some of the bigger carnivores, like, you know, bears and wolves, yay. But they do get on with the job with little fuss, and I really appreciate with their ability to live in all sorts of different ecosystems. So on to the critters that we're going to see while we're paddling around the coast. I'm going to start with one of the big stars of the weasel family. That's a sea otter. Most people who are kayakers are aware of sea otters. We're really lucky we have them in British Columbia. I mean, they're super cute. Like, how can you not like that? Super awesome. So a few quick facts about sea otters. They're the largest weasel. They actually weigh upwards of 40 kilos. They're a big critter. So, and those of you who've been out in, say, Cayuga has probably seen them. They're actually pretty sizable for a weasel. They interestingly have the densest fur of any mammal on the planet, up to 1 million hairs per square inch. Super, super dense. It's both a good thing for keeping them warm and dry. It helps them float, keeps them insulated. They spend almost their entire lives in the water, in cold ocean water. But it's bad for another reason that I'll get to in a second. They're little eating machines. These guys are amazing. They eat a quarter of their body mass in food every day. I mean, I wish I could do that. I like to eat. These guys are next level. I remember when we were on a trip out at in Quatsino Sound, and we were sitting in the wharf watching this one sea otter dive, and every time he dove, he came up with a clam and he ate it, and then he went back down. He did that for hours, and their bellies must just get so packed full of food. They're just so amazing at being able to eat. They generally live in areas where there's the water's not too deep. It's a little bit deep, not too deep, kind of between 15 to 25 meters deep, which describes a lot of the coastal waters on Vancouver Island, outer Vancouver Island. And they were fairly widespread. So the dense fur that I mentioned earlier is part of their undoing. Being that it's super soft and luxurious, sea otters were the target of the fur trade, unfettered fur harvest. Apparently they made really nice warm hats and gloves and blankets, apparently. And the unregulated harvest caused a widespread extirpation throughout most of their range in the Pacific Ocean by the late 1930s, when there were only about 2,000 otters left on the planet. So if you've ever paddled around sea otters, you can imagine how easy it would be for someone in a boat to paddle up to them with a shotgun or a rifle and shoot them. And that's basically how they got wiped out. The really sad part of the fur harvest of sea otters is that about half of the sea otters that got shot just sank. So, the pelts were super, super valuable, but that's the reason that they got extirpated so widely throughout their whole range. So between 1929, when the last one was shot in BC, and 1968, sea otters were absent from the coast of BC. But in 1968, that changed as a bunch of biologists from BC managed to finagle a deal with Alaska to grab a couple of the few otters that they had up in Prince William Sound and release them down in Cayuga Sound in 1969. So what they did, they flew up to Alaska, got some cages, crammed some poor sea otters in them, threw them in crates, and flew them back down to the coast. I don't know if they used twin otter planes to transport them. I think this one's a beaver. So, sorry, bad joke. So unfortunately, animal care wasn't really a huge concept back in the late 60s. And what the biologists didn't know at the time was that sea otters quickly overheat if kept out of water. So because they're so well insulated, they just overheat. And they're in the air for 5 or 6 or 7 hours. Most of them died during that first attempted release in 1969. So fortunately, by 1969, they figured out that they should maybe charter a ship and outfit it with open tanks filled with recirculating seawater. And they grabbed a bunch of sea otters again, brought them down, and this second release was much more successful, thankfully. And you see some sea otters being released at Chequasit Bay in 1969. So a total of 89 otters were released by 1970 in the Chequasit Bay area. And by 1977, they become pretty well established there. There was a lot of food, a lot of sea urchins, which makes for happy sea otters. And by 1997, they kind of expanded all the way up from Chequasit Bay down to Nootka Island. So they were expanding pretty rapidly. And then by 1995, their range was basically from up near Placino Sound all the way down to Hesquiat Peninsula. So quite a rapid expansion. An animal that doesn't breed particularly quickly, produce a lot of babies, pretty pronounced expansion. And then by 2001, they were basically from up by Galitas Channel all the way down to more or less Vargas Island and in that area. So pretty widely spread, pretty widespread, successful recovery. And now they're kind of, from Banfield on the west coast to Campbell River on the east coast, plus a few stragglers that show up in Victoria. There's the odd one that makes its way over to Haida Gwaii. Doesn't seem to last very long there. But they've recovered in a fair chunk of what would be their normal range. Pre-colonization, they would have been much more widespread, but they're not they've done a pretty good job of recovering. So this is kind of the population chart of the sea otters. They started with that few that they released in 1969, and basically had an explosive population growth. So they were originally considered endangered for quite a long period of time. And now we've got upwards of 10,000 animals, pretty healthy populations. They're expanding, the population is growing, which is great news. It's clearly a conservation success story. And now they're just special concern. They're not actually even threatened anymore. So it's always kind of nice when there's a nice animal that comes back and gets to do its thing again and expand and is doing well. So that's sea otters. The next gang of otters, this is the North American river otters. I like this photo because they always look like they're just up to no good. Like they're just like, how can we mess with this person? They're probably the otter that you're going to see most commonly. When you're out paddling around, you'll see them swing around and diving. They're pretty common on the South Island. They're common basically everywhere, all around Vancouver Island in the waters. The way that you can tell a sea otter from a river otter, there's a bunch of different ways. So this is what you see when you see a gang of river otters in the water. They tend to swim forward, like they're doing a dog paddle or something, right? Their head is forward, their body's behind them, that's how they swim. Sea otters tend to float on their back with their bellies, and they smack rocks and break apart urchins and whatnot. These guys just dive, eat, and come back up. But the really good way of telling them apart is when a river otter dives, it has this really pronounced long tail. So when you see an otter diving, when you see a river otter diving, you'll see their pronounced tail. That's a really good way to tell them apart. So otters are one of the animals you're going to see a lot around Victoria. And a friend of mine actually did a bunch of research, radio tagged a bunch of otters around Victoria and followed them for 3 or 4 years. And so I just wanted to give you some idea of what she learned, one of the things she learned. And that's that although you see lots of sea otters around, these are all different kind of territories of individual groups. So you've got a group that lives over by Esquimalt Lagoon, takes up that whole area there. Another animal that's kind of in the Esquimalt Harbor, over to just around by the sewage plant. A couple more in the inner harbor. There's a big gap for some reason along Dallas Road. I don't know why there's no otters there. But then if you go out towards Trial Island and up along Cadborough Bay, there's several more family groups. So just when you're out there, you're actually seeing different families as you paddle along. And so you'll find a bunch of different animals in different spots. I just thought that was an interesting bit of information about the otters of Victoria. So the next species that you'll see is probably one of the animals that you see most commonly from your kayak on the shore. A lot of people see this animal and have no idea what it is. It's this brown squiggly thing running along the shoreline. This is an American mink. They're about 50 centimeters long, so kind of half a meter long, kind of a boring brown. They have short little legs, and they're not that big, but they are pretty common in the intertidal. They eat a lot in the intertidal, feeding on rodents, fish, anything they can catch. They're very wiggly when they move along. I've got a little video that'll show you a little bit what they actually look like. They're I call them the losers of the carnivore world, because they actually are forced to live in one of those places that none of the other carnivores want to live. So the otters are in the ocean. They're eating all the fish. They're getting lots of good food. You got some of the bigger animals are up in the forest. Eating all of the forested animals, and these poor guys are kind of stuck in the intertidal, which is a risky place to be, and they just kind of have to make a living there. So they're stuck there. So if you ever are seeing something on that wiggling around in the shoreline, look for a white dot on its chin. That's how you can tell an American mink. They always have this very pronounced white dot on their chin. Just a couple little videos to show you. They're not the greatest videos, but kind of a wiggly little guy who just kind of bounces around. And this guy comes. He's just in the intertidal looking for little crabs and mollusks and whatever he can kind of scrounge up. And he's just kind of. I think he's giving us a bit of a chirp, I think, actually. They're just cute little guys, bounce around a whole lot. This next video is a bit more illustrative. So this is a mink just kind of paddling along in some shallow waters. They're not very good swimmers. This guy's doing a really lousy dog paddle. But when they get out of the water, this is what they look like. Short little legs, squat little bum, just kind of booging along. That's those are minks. So you'll see those pretty regularly when you're out paddling around. The next animal that you might get to see if you're lucky are called Pacific martins. They're not pine martins. Pine martins are actually from the UK and Europe, but they're our coastal martin that occurs in British Columbia. They're beautiful animals, but they tend to live more in the forest. So they do come down into the intertidal, so you will see them occasionally. I've seen them a couple times, but they're much more likely to be higher elevation in heavier woods. If you've ever been to some backcountry cabins and there's been an animal that's been in the cabin, it might have been a martin. They're known thieves of backcountry cabins. But the way you can tell a martin, which kind of looks like a mink apart, is they have a big bushy tail. Looks like a kind of a pipe cleaner. And mink have a little narrow, kind of looks like a dog's tail. These guys are big and bushy, and they're usually found places where there's lots of snow. Next animal that you might get to see if you're lucky, I don't know that I've ever seen one while I've been paddling, are short-tailed weasels. They're the magicians of the weasel world because they change their coat color. This guy is currently in his winter coat. You can imagine in the snow that'd be great. Not so good when you're out on Vancouver Island where there's no snow. But they're really cool. They change their coat color with the seasons. So in winter, they're almost invisible unless there's no snow. We find them, they're quite rare on Vancouver Island. They're actually an at-risk species on Vancouver Island. So if you do see one, you're quite lucky. They're about that long, small little guys, kind of a sausage-like thing. They're really important for indigenous regalia. You'll see a lot of coastal nations use ermines as part of the regalia. So that's just an example from, I think, up north somewhere of some regalia. Another wonderful weasel you might get to see is our wolverines. Okay, you're probably not going to get to see a wolverine. They're pretty rare. But if you're in the mid-coast, you might have some wolverines coming down from the mountain ranges down to the foreshore. They do occasionally swim across the water to get to other islands. They do eat salmon sometimes in some of the salmon-bearing streams. You're not likely to see one on Vancouver Island. There's been a myth about, not a myth, there was a belief that there was a endemic subspecies on Vancouver Island of wolverines. Unfortunately, that turns out not to be true. They're an amazing animal, but more found up in the boreal forest in northern BC than on coastal BC. And the next animal that, okay, you're not going to see on Vancouver Island at all, are fishers. Despite the name, they don't fish. It's like the worst name ever. They don't occur on Vancouver Island, but they are the best animal ever. This is the animal that I spend most of my time working on, so I could not do a talk on carnivores and not talk at least a little. So show a beautiful picture of a fisher. So that's that. So that's the weasel family. The next animal kind of on our list of animals you might see is one you probably have seen for sure, and that's the North American raccoon. They are widely spread in coastal BC. They do exceptionally well in the intertidal. They're really kind of designed for living, for eating in the intertidal zone. I'm sure you've seen them mucking around low tide, and they just kind of move things around with their hands. They don't look at what they're doing, they just kind of muck around. It's because they're foraging for food by feel. So they kind of stick their hands in the mud and try to find clams and crabs and whatever. And then they take it out and they wash their food before they eat it. They're very, very, pragmatic. They get a bad rap because they like urban developments and garbage and making things easy, but I don't call them trash pandas. They're actually a pretty cool animal. So a fellow who was doing, I think it was his PhD at UVic, Justin Serassi, did a really cool study looking at the distribution of where raccoons are foraging when. And it might tweak something for you, because I noticed this as well. So what he found is that raccoons only forage in the daytime when there are no big predators present, so no wolves or cougars. And so if you think about when you've been paddling and where you see raccoons, it's mostly in southern Vancouver Island, Gulf Islands. Every time I go paddling under the Gulf Islands or any of these islands, you see raccoons in the intertidal in the day. You go up to New Chatmats, where there are wolves and cougars, things that will eat raccoons. You never see them in the intertidal during the day. Really interesting kind of effect of there being changed carnivore populations on how animals make a living and live their lives. So in places where there are big carnivores, you do not see them in the intertidal. They go there during the night, but not during the day. Really kind of interesting kind of landscape of fear, it's called, stuff. And so those are the smaller carnivores, the more interesting ones, I think, and I'm biased. I'll pass it over to Helen. She's going to talk about the big sexy ones.
Moving on to the charismatic megafauna. I'm sure many people here have watched Island of the Sea Wolves, and so are quite familiar with our coastal wolves. Our coastal wolves are very well camouflaged. Quickly, how many wolves are in the picture? Three. See how many people didn't see all of those? They're smaller than our BC's interior wolves, and they are redder in color, as you can see here, not gray. And it makes them very, very hard to see in the intertidal zone. They're strong swimmers, and they have less dense coats than the interior wolves. And they have quite a different diet than our interior wolves. So they eat, the coastal wolves eat a lot of salmon and seals, shellfish, herring eggs, and scavenge whales, like this gross specimen here. Glad I wasn't there to smell this. Unlike their interior cousins who eat a lot more ungulates. And once they've eaten all of these incredible ocean foods, they like to sleep on soft beds too, and I really just had to use this photo because it's so gorgeous. And thank you to Ryan Tidman, who provided some of the photos for tonight. And while cougars are one of our coastal carnivores, it's highly unlikely that you'll see one. Has anybody here seen a cougar when they've been paddling? Oh wow, a couple people. Cool. They're very elusive and they aren't really all that drawn to the shorelines. However, they can swim, so you never know when you might see one swimming along, going off to the islands that have a lot of deer that draw them out to the islands. Moving on to the truly charismatic best megafauna. Not that there's any battle in our household. While bears are indeed in the carnivore family, they actually really aren't all that carnivorous in coastal British Columbia. The reason you see a lot of bears when you're out kayaking is due to the large amount of potential foods that are in the intertidal area and the creeks and the estuaries on the coast. A bear's job in life is to get fat, and it is one of the reasons that they get into trouble. They're meant to eat anything and everything and to test everything to see whether or not it is food. And then if they find out that it is food, to always keep going back there to try it again. So our coastal bears start feeding on greenery, really actually just about now. Some of the bears will be starting to come out, and then they gradually replace that with eating berries and insects, and then gradually moving into the late summer having salmon. They do sometimes kill deer fawns for their more carnivorous side, but they rarely hunt deer or elk, adult deer or elk. When you're seeing them when you're out paddling and kayaking, it's usually that they're foraging in the intertidal area, like this bear on the left, who seems to be eating some kind of seaweed, and on the right, so they'll eat blenny eels in the intertidal, and crabs, crustaceans, urchins, isopods, little insect creatures, and mussels and barnacles. And here's a mom with her cub of the year out feeding on the intertidal life. Taking cubs out into the open and into the intertidal areas, much like the raccoons, is kind of a risky proposition for a female with young, but the draw of those intertidal food sources, the protein and the fat-rich foods is very strong, so they will come out as well. Sometimes bears make poor choices. If you can see in this photo, this is a bear with a sea urchin in his mouth. I say his because I'm just assuming. And maybe those are more suited to the sea otters, who are a little bit more capable of handling something like that. And here is another hard way to make a living, scraping barnacles. You can imagine how much this would wear down the teeth of bears doing this, but desperate times call for desperate measures. This is the scat or poop of a bear. Not sure if you can quite tell, but that is 100% crab skeletons. Also, I'm assuming a poor choice that wouldn't be very comfortable. Salmon are a much easier way to gain weight than urchins, barnacles, and crabs. Salmon kind of make the whole world go round on the coast. Bears can be picky eaters of salmon. At times they only eat the skin or the eggs, but at other times, like in this photo, they'll eat whatever they can get. Bears are incredibly important dispersers of nutrients to the forest from ocean creatures. Up to 70% of the nitrogen in the plants and the trees along salmon-bearing streams is marine-derived nitrogen that is coming from bears and other creatures, eagles and stuff, carrying salmon into the woods and them being eaten on by the little, what's the opposite of megafauna? Olive Rich's creatures that eating the salmon that the bears have left behind, and the wolves are eating them too, all the way down to the insects eating them and them dissolving into the forest and being uptaken as nutrients by the plants and the trees. We've just returned from a trip to Fiji, lucky us. And one of the things that really kind of struck us spending time in Fiji is that like somewhere like that doesn't have these animals that kind of link the ocean to the land, that is carrying those nutrients from the ocean into the land and fertilizing the plants and animals. Unfortunately, salmon stocks in British Columbia have declined greatly, certainly in during my career. Overfishing, logging, road building, salmon farms, and climate change aren't helping our salmon stocks any, and these are indeed having impacts on the bear populations on our coast. Grizzly bears eat the same things as what I've listed for black bears. However, they also spend quite a bit more time on big open estuaries like this one, feeding on sedges. This is Night Inlet. I'm sure some of you have been there. So feeding on the sedges in the estuary, as well as on the salmon in the fall. There we go. In the bottom right here is what an estuary often looks like in the coast, especially if you've been up on the mid-coast. Grizzly bears, as the salmon season is ending, often go out on these big estuaries, and they kind of rototill the estuaries to dig up the roots and corms that are under the top layer of the estuary. And so you see all these turned over big piles of sort of dirt where they have been digging up all the roots and the corms. You won't generally see black bears out in these areas as there's grizzly bears present, because grizzly bears will eat them. But you see a lot of these estuaries ringed by crabapple trees, which are quite obvious with their yellow leaves in the fall, and that's often where you'll see the black bears on the estuaries, is climbing up and eating all the crab apples. All of these foods that I've mentioned are impacted by climate change, some positively, some negatively. Timing of the availability of these foods is changing, and if for the birds as well and other creatures, if you're kind of programmed through evolution to eat something when it's ripe and now it's ripening at a different time, how does that affect your ability to get food? And for bears who are trying to put on big weight gains in order to survive the winter when they're hibernating, it can be impacting them, and we don't even really know the full extent that that's going to be yet. So how bears can impact your kayaking camping trips. We'll just talk about a few facts about them. Black bears can climb very well. I'm sure most of you know that. This is a very, very bouncy video taken from my kayak. This bear even impressed me. We all know that they can climb trees quite well, but this one was feeding along the beach and then just decided to scale the cliff. Grizzly bears don't climb as well as black bears. Black bears evolved in forested environments, which is why they have shorter curved claws and climb trees well. Grizzly bears evolved more out on the plains, and they have long, straighter claws that are meant for digging, so they're good at digging up marmots and digging up estuaries like those last photos. Oh, I missed the end of that. So that black bear was using his claws to climb a cliff quite well. For those of you that know me personally, you also know that while I've studied black bears for 30-something years, currently I've been working quite hard on a campaign to get black bear dens protected in coastal British Columbia. Our black bears here on Vancouver Island den in the winter inside large hollow trees, large old growth hollow trees that are only protected in the Great Bear Rainforest in Haida Gwaii, and I'm trying to get them protected. And so just like Rich had to mention fishers, I have to just mention that brief bit and just show this little clip going back to how well bears climb. This is a female with a new cub of the year last April, who was bringing her cub down for the first time from her winter den, which is just out of sight up in the tree. So she climbs about 4 meters up the side of the tree and has had her babies up in this tree. And this is her bringing her cub of the year down for the first time, except that another cub was still up in the tree and wouldn't come down, and so she had quite a battle on her hands as one would come out and the other would stay up. And so there you have this is actually in Souk. So I'm working very hard to try and get these kinds of trees protected in British Columbia, and if you're interested in that, you can talk to me or look up hashtag Save BC Bear Dens, and you'll find all sorts of stuff on that. And if you want to do anything about it, just write your MLA is pretty much the only thing you can do at this point. And yes, climate change is impacting bear denning dates rather drastically. We are finding on Vancouver Island bears are denning quite a bit later than they did in the 90s when I studied them. So bears climb well, bears also swim well. This is the Bunsbys. And my point about this is that when you're kayak camping and you think you're off on little islands and you don't need to worry about bears and your food, you actually do still need to be worried about bears and your food. This is a bear who we just sat on the island. We were sleeping on. He started over on the right here, swam to the island right in front there, swam to this little island, and is now going to the island that has a bunch of kayakers camping right there. And just was swimming from island to island. He wasn't getting in any trouble. He was actually just naturally foraging in the intertidal area. But just to show that, you know, don't let down your guard and where you're keeping your food. Grizzly bears also swim very well. And that brings me to my next point, because somebody's going to ask me this tonight. Are grizzly bears moving to Vancouver Island? Yes, they are. So there was 2 cases of female grizzly bears with cubs on Vancouver Island in 2024. Why are they doing it? Well, they used to be here back in the day. There is fossil evidence of them in the Pellucidar cave. They swim well, and so it is kind of shocking that they really haven't moved here sooner. I've looked at the maps. I think the longest distance they have to swim if they're coming from the mainland is 1.6 kilometers in sort of the Sayward area. That's the farthest distance between islands, which they would do quite easily because they do swim well. So why are they coming here? You know, is it because of the collapse of salmon stocks? Maybe now that they're rebounding from the removal of the fish farms, maybe they'll stay on the mainland, which I would prefer. But yes, they have been coming over. So keep your eyes out if you're camping in the Johnstone Strait area and report it to somebody if you see more. In fact, there's just been a little movie come out about them. Because bears can climb and swim well, you need to work at keeping your food away from them when you're kayak camping. So follow your BC Marine Trails Code of Conduct, including avoiding disturbing wildlife and maintaining regulated distances from wildlife. Keeping campsites clear of attractants being the big key one. Keep your food away from them. And as for distances away from animals, it's best to always stay at least 100 meters away from bears and other animals. Just because they're ignoring you doesn't mean that you're not stressing them out. This is actually, I'm in this kayak group. This is a commercial group, and they wanted to have lunch here. And actually, that's the bear who climbed the cliff. Then he appeared on the beach we were supposed to go to at lunch, and they kind of wanted him to leave, and we perhaps weren't the best behaved as we should have been in that situation. Just because they're ignoring you doesn't mean that they aren't stressed by you. I don't know what general people think of as stress behavior from bears, but this is actually one of the biggest signs of stress in a bear is yawning. I know this bear looks like he's trying to catch a fish there, but if you watch bears interacting with each other in stressful situations and dealing with people, you'll often see glancing sideways and yawning, and that is a big sign of stress. The last sign of you impacting them is that they leave the beach. So anytime a bear leaves the beach in your presence, you've likely scared it away. This may not be a big deal in remote places, but in busy places, probably like the Broughtons, you know, this kind of disturbance adds up to reduced time to put on the fat that they need. And if you remember from the beginning, their number one job is to get fat so that they can survive the winter. That brings us to the end. Just a thank you to, I don't know if Gary remembers which photo there was. It was his, but there was a bear on the beach that was Gary's photo. So thank you for that, and a few other people that provided photos as well. And with that, we'll take questions. Yes, Gary?
Rich.
Yes.
You're going to make us have a battle of which is the best animal?
So in your talk about sea otters, you said they were down to 2,000 population.
Yep.
Is lack of genetic diversity a problem in sea otters?
It doesn't seem to be, and that's partly because the pockets of which those 2,000 were in were quite widely spread. So there's actually pretty good, from Kamchatka through the Aleutians, Alaska, California. There was just enough genetic variability. But that's a very good question. Normally you would expect, but they seem to do okay, and they're certainly the population is doing fairly well now. So. Mike?
Does any of the BC introduced sea otters come from California, or were they all from Alaska?
They were all from Prince William Sound. Yeah. So I'm not sure if they're used to colder wet water. I'm not sure, but yeah, they're all from up north.
The sea otters have done a really nice job coming down the coast as far as Hutchwood. But how come they haven't come further?
That's a good question. I think they probably have come down as far as Tofino, but they certainly have. But getting past that, there's not a lot of good necessarily supportive habitat between Tofino and the Broken Group. It's the surf beaches aren't great for sea otters. They don't surf that well, I don't think. And so I'm not sure why. There does seem to need to be that depth of 15 to 25 meters in a large area. So maybe there's not, I haven't really looked at any charts, but you think the Broken Group would be chock full of them, and apparently they were at one point. But you'll notice when the sea otters come in, the kelp starts to grow back, and the whole ecosystem basically recovers. They're a really important keystone species because you get these barrens in the marine environment where there's no kelp because the sea urchins are just chowing down on every single poor little kelp plant that's trying to grow, and sea otters do a pretty good job eating those little guys. Yeah.
How do they get them open?
It's really awesome, actually. They lay on their back. So sea otters will often carry, they're one of the few animals that uses a tool really regularly. So they have a rock, they have a little pocket they actually keep their rock in. And then they go dive down, pick up the sea urchin, they're just laying there, right? Bring them to the surface, they lay on their back and they smack them open with a rock. And then chow down. And like the one time Helen and I were watching the sea otter in Quasino Sound, it was amazing how efficient, how much food they could get, and they just weren't. It was nonstop for hours. Yeah.
Yeah, we were up in the southern Maristas Valley area last year, and it was an an urchin barrens. There were all the kelp was just there was just little shreds of kelp left, and just millions of urchins, and we really need sea otters here. And I noticed on your distribution map there are otters not very far away. So why wouldn't they have discovered such a rich food source?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think with otters, the way I think the population expands is the single males kind of invade an area first, and then it takes quite a while for the females, because females are much more social. They hang out in groups when they've got their kits. So you'll see these huge rafts of female otters with their little babies on their chest, super cute. But they seem to like being in a group, and so I think it takes a while for enough females to get to an area where males have invaded, been there for maybe 5 or 10 years, and before they start kind of reproducing and then expanding there. So maybe it's just a matter of time. I mean, it's been the expansion of sea otters has been was unexpected, certainly. The rate and the speed at which they were colonizing new areas was unexpected. So I think maybe it's a matter of time. 10 years, there might be lots, and they might just get there and go, hey, look at all this food, and then do well.
We were watching a really cool program on the urchins. Although they look like they're there too, they're basically all shriveled up, and they go into a state until the kelp grows back again, so they may not be a food source.
Yeah, and maybe they're not very tasty. No. Yeah.
Can't let you go without having your comment on what was going on with the race rock rapist a while ago, one that was attacking all of the river otters and in fact attacking anything that moved, as far as you could hear on the report. So what was going on there?
The proclivities of the weasel family.
I think that it actually is just some, it's just interspecific killing. I think it's just the otter killing the other animals, and I'm not sure that it's. No, that's a dominant. It's a dominance. That would be a dominance behavior. So that it's not that they're mating. It's that I think they're. I've killed you and I'm dominating you. It's. Would be my. That's my take on it. But I'm going to defend weasels to the end. So I don't think anything they could ever do is wrong.
But no, all the families have some aggressive rapist tendencies.
Yes.
Okay, so I was kayaking, several years ago, we were chatlets when the sea otters were on improve, and it's a scientific miracle that they're spreading and everything, but they were being shot. Would you like to comment on, is there still a problem with the urchin farmers, or is that all being sort of settled down now?
There is no trade in sea otters.
No, urchins.
Urchins.
Sea otters eat the urchins.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely a perception that the sea otters do eat lots of urchins, and urchins are for some communities a valuable food resource and resource for sale. So there's a dislike of anything that's gonna affect that. But my comment is that the sea otters were there when there's always been sea otters there prior to 1929 or whatever it was, and they kept the ecosystem in balance. And I think people's perception of what the seafloor should look like when you're a sea urchin harvester is very different than what Mother Nature would say it should look like. So I think it's a different perspective. And there are people who don't like sea otters, for sure. Yeah.
When we're kayak camping, fresh water is sometimes a challenge. So is that a limiting factor in making these ecosystems livable?
Oh, that's a good question. So most of the animals that live in the ocean, so like sea otters, they actually are getting their water that they need from the foods that they're eating. So when you eat fat, you actually get water from it as a byproduct of digestion. So a lot of marine mammals, they don't drink salt water. They actually are getting their water from the animals that they're eating and from the digestion of the fat. That's why most marine carnivores are eating really, really fatty foods. So sea otters are eating urchins, which have big fatty deposits in them, and clams and all that. So that's my understanding, anyways. I'm certainly not a physiologist by any stretch.
I'm going to ask back to the sea otters coming back along the coast. In Cayucit, there's two areas to come into the harbor, and the native communities on one, and then the other part of the community, Walter Island. If you look on the map, I'm sure many of you have been there. So what my understanding was, when the sea otters came back, they ate the sea urchins, and the sea urchins were the ones that kept the kelp population down. So in talking to some of the natives, this is a long time ago when I was quite familiar with the area, a lot of people were complaining about the amount of kelp there was to bring their boats into the harbor.
Yep.
And that was kind of an annoyance for them.
Yeah, that's
kelp get through.
Yeah,
Is that true? Like the sea urchins do eat?
oh, definitely, yeah. Like if you look at the very old charts from the late 1800s of the west coast of Vancouver Island, there were not unnavigable areas because there was so much kelp. And that's partly because the sea otters are eating all the urchins. So there's definitely something to be said for that.
Considered healthier oceans.
Yeah.
I have a bear question.
Yay!
So you said that the bears are denning later.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered, you know, having started in more northerly area of Canada than we are now, what is the denning arrangement? What was it, and what's it become now in terms of time of year and
Right.
or coastal?
Black bears, grizzly bears, males den for a shorter time period than females. So on North Vancouver Island in the Nimkish in the early 90s, the males would den as short as 3 months. Every bear denned, usually a little bit longer. So females can only have babies in dens on the coast, in trees. And those babies are born weighing about 1 pound, size of a pound of butter. And they're completely helpless with their eyes closed, and they need to nurse on their mothers for 70 to 100 days, growing bigger and stronger in order to have the strength to climb a tree like that little whiny guy was doing. And they need to be able to climb those trees to get away from predators when they come out. So when they leave the den, they need to be strong enough to run after mom and climb up trees for safety. So those females who are having cubs den up to 6 months on Vancouver Island. People don't believe me, but they really do. So that was April 11th that video was taken, those cubs left the den for the first time. And then she spent about 2 weeks at the base of the tree. They kind of start moving around and climbing the tree, and they'll go back up in for a couple nights and come out and just kind of start gaining strength. So in the early 90s, females denned as early as the end of October and came out the end of April, beginning of May. I have a very small sample size of what's been going on in the last 5 years, but like I know one bear we just found out denned like February 2nd or something. I've had a bunch of bears not den until early January. We need a bigger sample size. The government is now, they're in their 6th year of running another den study, but haven't had much luck getting dates that the bears are denning, because I'd really like to have a lot more data to see, has it really changed this much? They're capable of denning for 8 months, and certainly in the colder places, even Montana, Alaska, all these kind of places, like they do, the females with cubs will den up to 8 months. Polar bears do the same thing. The females have to go to inland to dens to give birth, and those females are going and denning for months after they've starved the entire summer. So in places like Churchill, those bears haven't eaten all summer that they've been on land, and there's no ice for them to hunt off of. And then they go inland and go to bed to have babies for months, have to get them big and strong enough in order to hike back out to the ice. So they're longer than 8 months, so those females aren't eating. They're physiological marvels, and that's why they've been studied a bunch by NASA and stuff, because how do they do this without mostly eating, drinking, pooping, or peeing the whole time, and nurse cubs. So doctors have studied them and everything, trying to figure out how to apply these kinds of miracles to human medicine and to astronauts. Because bears go into these little tiny spaces and they're not moving very much in those 6 to 8 months, and yet they're not losing their bone density or their muscle mass. It's all kind of internal recycling, and so if we could unlock the keys to some of that, we would actually have a lot of help with human medicine. So, but in real answer to your question, it does seem to be like they're going to bed like a couple months later.
Is that reducing the population now?
Gosh, if only anybody knew. BC has no idea how many, especially black bears, we have. We've spent millions counting grizzly bears before they banned the hunt, but BC has only ever done one kind of population estimate in one tiny area of Vancouver Island once. Every time you listen to the news and they say we have 120 to 160,000 black bears, that is complete crap. They have absolutely no idea how many we have. It was a back of the napkin estimate done by my old boss, and he doesn't have the napkin. Yeah, it was back.
How long will they continue to use the same den? Use the same den, like pass another to offspring?
Yeah, so they're passed down. The government study is doing some genetics on the hair to see like whether or not they're related bears or not. But these dens, like I have dens that I found in the early 90s, and I keep going back to them. And if they're still standing and usable, they're mostly being used. And so, we know the original occupants are dead, and they do get passed on, and we seem to have even like sort of competition for dens. I had one west of Campbell River where there's like no old growth for 13 kilometers from this one blown down tree that they've been using, and it was occupied, and I have video footage of another bear like showing up and being like, oh crap, and leaving. So yeah, that's happening.
Bears to raccoons.
Oh, well, Rich can talk about it.
I don't know if you guys have any idea what happened to all the raccoons that were on Portland Island. We used to go there when the kids were little, and there'd be raccoons everywhere. And I went this summer twice for just overnighter. I didn't see one raccoon on Portland Island. I wondered if you had any idea what happened to that population, or did they get eradicated by BC Parks? Or
I wouldn't think they'd get eradicated, but I do know that cougars swim fairly well. And there was a cougar on Piers Island not that long ago.
Really?
Yes, really. And so I wouldn't think that a cougar would actually do it.
I just wondered if there was a program to eradicate them.
Not that I know of, and I'd be very surprised if they did. There might have been a disease outbreak or something on that island. I'm not sure.
Could have been parvovirus.
Yeah, it could be.
That can knock out. Remember Stanley Park years ago? Thousands of raccoons gone.
Yeah, you do get disease outbreaks that will certainly do that.
The last time I was over there, I noticed that the raccoons were much smaller than the ones on the Big Island. And I'm wondering if I just ran into a family of midgets or what?
They do grow big when there's lots of food, so maybe there's less food there. That's why that the ones you see in downtown Victoria can be kind of gnarly, and the ones on the islands are a little bit smaller. Less food, I suspect, but I don't know. In the back, yeah.
Yeah, just a comment on the otters. In Barry Gow's book on One of Fucus Strait, basically it starts off with the reason they came is for the sea otter trade. And it doesn't appear there is hardly any sea otters on South Island. And I'm wondering if that's because from what my meager observations I usually find sea otters in areas where there's lots of islands and open ocean, lots of wave action.
Yeah.
And down here further south, there's not near as much as there is up on the west coast of the island.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising actually, because we have the upwelling of the cold, nutrient-rich water that you would expect would increase the diversity of food in our waters. I wouldn't be surprised if there were otters here, but they probably got gone a long time ago. I don't know.
Yeah, no sea otters in the Victoria Gulf Islands. Or you don't find them in shell middens at all, whereas you go to the west coast or Hawaii, and Hawaii is
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's a bit surprising to me, but I am not a sea otter specialist by any stretch.
Fishers.
She asked me what fishers, and I will talk forever. But yeah.
How big's a fisher?
How big's a fisher? Well,
I saw something in the middle of the road once up in northeastern BC, and I did a deep dive trying to figure out what it was, and I think it was a fisher.
It could have been.
It was a fisher.
They're about a meter long, so from tip of the nose to the tip of the tail, about a meter. They're way about well, between 2.5 and 6 kilos. So 10, way up between.
It kind of looked like a big bear cub, except it had a tail.
Yep.
Move like a cat.
Yeah. Yep. Could be. Yeah. If it wasn't a wolverine, it'd probably a fisher.
It wasn't a wolverine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why are they called fishes?
It's great. I never think I'd get fisher questions. So when when Europeans first came to North America and started, they were here largely to trap furs, and the English fur traders were catching this animal that looked a lot like a European polecat. They don't actually look a lot like European polecats, but they're kind of blackish. And the English fur traders thought that, or trappers thought that the French fur traders were calling this animal a fichet, which is the French term for polecat. And so they kind of anglicized that to fisher, and that's kind of, the name kind of stuck. It's weird because fishers go nowhere near water, and the really silly thing is that the French fur trappers have their own separate word, piquant, for fishers. Not even close. So
Good job.
that's the story behind the world's stupidest name for an animal.
Bear question.
Yay!
So that video of the mama bear coming out of the den,
Yeah.
okay, which was multi-meters above ground. Somebody shot that video. How long did they have to sit there?
No, that was taken with one of my remote cameras. So I've had a lot of trail cameras at dens, and that footage just happened to turn out really well. It was a totally bizarre occurrence because I actually found out about the den in the winter because somebody heard the cubs crying and they thought they'd been abandoned and all this, and we went there thinking it was empty and put up cameras just on the off chance, and then I went back in May and had this amazing footage. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Like, I gave you the short version of that, of Mum and the cub and the crying, and she climbed the tree like 5 or 6 times, like one after that, trying to get the one who was crying up top to come down, but every time she went up, the one who was down tried to go up, and then it was like the nightmare motherhood video of anything, and this poor mom, and I mean, you see how hard it is to climb that, like straight up the side, and it was it was hysterical, because, well, I mean, it was sad. Funny,
you should tell people you huddled there for 2 months in a block.
So Ryan Tidman, who provided a bunch of the beautiful, especially the wolf photos and stuff tonight, has been going out with me for at least 4 years. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've had these super expensive cameras that he's had on loan from Canon to do a National Geographic article on the bear dens. And we've put them out, and of course, every single time we put them out, no bears use the trees we put them out on. Poor guy's been at the end of his rope, in between trips to photographing bees in Indonesia and penguins in Antarctica, and filming our oceans and all these things. He's running around to dens with me, and last week, thank God, finally he got this beautiful photo of, and it was a tree very similar to this, a split cedar tree, and the den is right at the split, and there's the dusting of snow and everything, and there's this face looking out, which is like, oh, thank God. It's been, and he is trying to do all of this with remote camera photography, because we won't have people sitting at dens. And because of the profile of my sort of campaign to get dens protected, I get calls a lot. And so the first time the BBC phones you, you get really oh my God, the BBC's phoning me. And the 9th time, you start going, no, I'm not putting any videographers sitting 20 meters from a den, sorry, no, that's too much impact on the animals. Click. Because there's a lot of people who've wanted to do it, but we insist on it being done remotely. It's just too sensitive a situation for them. These bears aren't habituated to people. This isn't like a viewing area. These are all wild bears on Vancouver Island, and are not going to put up with too much interference. So no, that was not somebody sitting there videoing. It was a trail camera.
There
was one photo of a cub on the mother's back.
Yeah,
Is that common? I've never
I haven't seen it very much at all. That's another one of Ryan's photos, because he's spent a lot of time on the ocean. It's very common in some of the different species. There's 8 species of bear in the world, and it's very common in some of the South American ones. But I don't see it a lot here. You see it a fair bit with polar bears, but I haven't seen black bears do it a lot, so I was surprised when Ryan gave me that photo, yeah.
Does anything prey on black bears on Vancouver Island?
100%. And that's why I don't want grizzly bears moving over, because they definitely do. And so these kinds of dens that have entrances above ground are the absolute best, safest place for female black bears to give birth, because they are safe from male black bears, but also grizzly bears who don't climb as well as our black bears. So, as I mentioned, male black bears may only den for like 3 months, and females are in dens for up to 6 months, which leaves females with cubs kind of sitting ducks for attacks by male bears, unfortunately. So we had a fair bit of that in the Nimkish when I was studying, had radio collar bears following them. But wolves and cougars will also attack them in the den and not in the den. And even things like golden eagles can take cubs. And the den that I mentioned west of Campbell River, it seemed to be some competition at that one, other bears coming to it and stuff. But the year after I had a female and cub in it, I had a female cougar and quite a large kitten show up at that one too. And whether or not they were looking for somewhere to curl up in themselves, or were looking to see if there was occupants of that den, I'm not really sure, but it definitely happens, and wolves, especially packs of wolves, can take black bears for sure. Yeah. Right?
I've heard of stories of a mix of a grizzly bear and a black bear. Is that true, or is it a myth?
I haven't heard of the grizzly bear, black bear, but certainly there's been a fair bit of press over the Hisleys and the growlers, the grizzly bear, polar bear interbreeding, which has been, it seems it's been one female grizzly bear and then her offspring who have mixed. And so whether or not that will become more common is questionable. Certainly their ranges are starting to overlap quite a bit more. There is quite a bit of movement of the ranges of these species through climate change. Yeah. Yep.
I understand that ferocity is in a polar bear is quite considerably larger than that of a grizzly. Is that correct? Or?
Ferocity?
Yeah.
Yeah. In short, yes. I have done lots of work around grizzly bears, and I've been a polar bear guide, so I've led tours and
I guess the second part of the question, but halfway directed to Rich, is how many fisher would it take to take on?
Good question. So I've worked on grizzly bears in a number of different places. So I worked on them in the barren grounds of Northwest Territories, no trees, where they hunted caribou a fair bit, adult caribou a fair bit. They run them into the rocky areas, and I'm pretty comfortable, extremely comfortable, overly comfortable with black bears, certainly on Vancouver Island. I am much more careful around grizzly bears, but it's not like I stay awake at night. Polar bears I would never ever mess with. Like, when things hunt for a living, they know how to hunt for a living, right? So like our black bears, salmon, and, they don't do a lot of hunting, and even our coastal grizzly bears, not so much. The grizzly bears in the Northwest Territories who hunt for a living, I'd be far more careful around. And then polar bears can put together a whole hunting plan, right? Like, they see something at a distance, they come up with like, oh, I'm gonna scoot over there, and I'm gonna go under that, and then, like, they're very capable, and there's been some incredible stories of how they've kind of put together a plan over days that they figured out, like, how to get at something.
Would be alone hunting or in a pack?
Oh, no, alone. Yeah. So I just kind of how much do they hunt for a living is what kind of always sticks in my mind about how careful I need to be about them. Weasels hunt for a living.
That's why you need to be afraid of weasels.
And they have really big egos. Like, that wasn't a fake photo of that little guy on the back of that big bird. And I have gone weasel trapping quite a bit with Rich. It's almost like an inverse relationship as they get bigger. I mean, everyone's so scared of wolverines, but it's not like they're gonna, these things don't wake up in the morning, and bears also don't wake up in the morning going, "Ooh, I'm gonna get me a human." But like the ermine that we've had at trap sites, when we've got like hunks of meat trying to catch his fishers, and you come and there's an ermine there, and it stands there, you go, like, you start to believe that it could take you. I've been like, honey, you're honest, like, I don't have to be worried about this. Like, they're like this big and they're pretty convincing. There's a red sweater.
Another weasel question. The ermines who are on Vancouver Island clearly maladapted because they're turning white. Is there any sign that they are going to turn less white over time?
They are not as prone to turning white as the mainland one. So most of what we know about how much they change coats come from trappers who catch them in traps. And there's one fellow up in Coombs who has caught a few of them, and he says about 50% of them are white in the winter and 50% don't turn color. So they kind of, I think some do, some don't. If you're in the interior of BC where it's snowy in the wintertime, all of them turn white. Otherwise, they get picked off.
So they either turn or they don't. They don't have pinto.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
I actually do love weasels, and if you are an Instagram person, all you need to do is watch one ermine video, and then your whole feed is these amazing ermine videos of them popping up through snow. It's most of my entertainment every morning. Ginny?
Oh, and I'm curious as to why they're not doing a population count for black bears and what stops them from doing
Oh, Ginny, I don't think you want to go here. I filed a forest practices board.
They count everything.
I filed a forest practices board complaint against the government when my husband was the carnivore conservation specialist for the government. Complaining about the management of bear dens, and the report from the Forest Practice Board was that, well, since the government has absolutely no idea how many black bears that they have, they couldn't possibly know if the lack of dens is impacting the population, which led to them doing the first ever actual black bear specific population inventory only on the Mosaic lands south of Nanaimo. And so that was done. It was a small pilot project, and they haven't done anything since, and haven't you could actually do some really good work. They've collected black bear hair as part of some of the big grizzly bear population estimates. It's not particularly statistically valid, which I won't get into why, but they could actually sit down and do some habitat stuff and be like, well, in this habitat type we have this many bears, and redo what the original estimate was, but for some reason they're not. Yeah.
Coastal wolf question. I was lucky enough in the Broken Islands one year to see like a flash in the peripheral vision, a pack of coastal wolves go across a beach. Are they normally operating in packs, and how big are those packs usually?
You were reading up on something about that on the coast, that it's not as beneficial.
Jeez, I thought it was a pretty straightforward question.
It's not.
So the wolves generally hunt in packs. That's the way they're designed. In most areas of British Columbia, which I'm familiar with, they hunt in large-ish packs because they're taking down large prey. So they're out hunting for moose or other ungulates that require a team effort to bring down the prey. On the coast, when they're largely eating intertidally, you don't need to be in a pack of 25 or 14 wolves to find something to eat in the intertidal. So I think this is just my expectation. I think you have smaller wolf packs on the coast because of that, because they're not required to have that group dynamic hunting strategy. And so I think that's why they're probably smaller, or seem smaller. Certainly the wolves that we've seen on the coast have been in small packs. I think we saw like 6 or 7.
This was about between 6 and 8.
Yeah. And I think
That's
that's
more the
what
coastal size.
I think that's a coastal wolf adaptation because of the distribution of their food resources.
Those photos of the group of 3 wolves and stuff, that was New Chatlet's as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So ranges of sea otters and river otters overlap, and if they do, how do they interrelate?
They do overlap quite a bit. Sea otters are much more away from the foreshore. So river otters are rarely, this is my experience, more than 50 meters away from the shoreline, because they do come onto the shore. That's their social system is based largely on communal communication through their latrine sites, which are all on land. So they're never very far away from land because they always come up and poop and pee and mark their territory and go down the road and do it again. They're prolific scent markers. That's a nice way to say that. Whereas sea otters are much more, I wouldn't say pelagic, but they're much more out in the ocean, away from land. They tend to like to be in, I said, the 15 to 25 meter deep water. They like to, particularly the females, like to be in these big rafts where they're in kelp beds. And so it's kind of where the kelp is, I think, is where the sea otters are. I'm sure they come across each other regularly, and I wouldn't expect that the river otter would fare particularly well in that little matchup, but yeah, I don't know, but I can't imagine there's a lot of interaction. Except for race rocks, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a cool question, more for some of the people who know Jenny Montgomery Grove to Chatham Discovery a lot. I'm wondering if the members, do you see many raccoons over there? And I'm trying to think back on my trips, and I don't know what I have, and I wondered if there was there.
Has anybody seen many there? I don't remember seeing them there. What's the island on the way to Portland that we always see so many? What's the one just east of Swartz Bay? Cole. Cole's the one where we've seen the most raccoons.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I suspect their populations just fluctuate a fair bit. And maybe it depends on the intertidal and what it's like and how productive it is for them. Like I'm not a raccoon expert
I saw
either.
a skeleton of one, and the wolf was there on the path.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it was a young seal, but it looked like a seal of a skeleton had been consumed.
Oh yeah. And it's amazing that
sea otter, I'm sorry, but a river otter.
it's amazing that wolf was able to survive out there. That's not a lot. That's not a lot of area for a wolf to find enough food. So. Yep.
So, as a lot of us are kayak campers, what is your order of recommendation for bear safety when we're camping?
Bear safety or food safety?
So, I'm talking about limiting bear contact or bear supply. So, flares, gun flares, bear bangers, spray, what do you recommend?
Don't recommend bangers particularly unless you practice with them. Flares and bangers are generally not recommended by bear biologists. They can quite easily land behind the animal and scare them towards you is the usual concern. 100% bear spray, keep it in a proper container in your boat so you don't accidentally discharge it, but bear spray, both in the case of black bears, grizzly bears, and polar bears, bear spray is very effective and the best thing that you can have. And avoid encounters in the first place by making enough noise and don't use bells. Bells don't work. Bells can be quite interesting to bears who aren't used to bells. There's been research done on that. And personally, they drive me insane. And I'm probably a bigger threat to you than the bears.
How close does the bear have to be before you discharge the spray?
Very close. 2 meters? You can do a little bit more than 2 meters, but close. Be careful about the wind getting in, blowing it in your face, but even if you both get it, that's fine.
How many meters per second is that bear doing?
Yeah, exactly, yes. There was somebody who was designing a virtual reality, you put on goggles and the bear would run at you and you got to virtually spray it and stuff. I got to take part in testing of that. It was fantastic because then they would speed it up and stuff. Like, and like it was 360, like you had to like look around and see if you could see the bear in the forest and work on it. But people who work in the bush, we practice with bear spray, like our old ones and stuff. Practice spraying it so that you are proficient in knowing how to take off the safety and spraying it. It does go quite far and it is extremely effective, and it is more effective than carrying a gun.
And there's a kickback from the can.
No, there's no kickback from the can. It's not, well, I mean, you have to hang on to it, but it's not like the kickback of a gun. But the spray, you can get some on you, but usually it's still quite effective in reversing the bear, and you just may be uncomfortable for a bit too. Yep.
If you see a bear on the beach, this happened to my fiance. He got charged by a bear. And I was sitting in the kayak and I was holding his kayak. We had to get water, and there was a lot of bears around, so we took a risk. So he went into the bush to get the water where we knew the water source was. And the bear was along the beach. It was like a point, and he came out. And the bear, in between the forest and, he was in between the bear and the forest. And so my theory was the bear got threatened.
Yeah.
Because he was coming, and I was here. And the bear charged him, because luckily he ran into the water this way, and the bear veered off that way. So I just wanted to know if you thought that's a good idea, that one rule is not, if you see a bear along the beach, don't go in between the bear and the forest. What I mean?
Yeah, because the bears, I mean, especially, we're talking black bear here, I'm assuming, black bears view trees as their safety place, and so they are going to want to go to the trees, for sure. There's a bunch of bears around. That's kind of a curious situation, like why is there a bunch of bears around? Is that a mom and cubs, in which case you might be defensive of cubs? Or is there a food source there, like something dead that's brought in a few bears? Like it's quite unusual that you'd see more than one. So I'd be kind of wondering what kind of situation you were walking into in the first place.
But there was a water source there. What was happening, this was in 1995, there were a lot of creeks that were dried up. And this was Nootka, Benson Point. And so we were further in towards the inlet, the deep inlet. We must have counted about 17 bears that day.
Was there a salmon in the river?
Yeah, there were so many.
Oh,
bears.
okay. They were there for the salmon then. Oh, okay.
And this was a very large male black bear.
Right.
And he was really foraging along the beach beside where I was. I didn't see him until he was coming along. And unfortunately, Daniel had already gone into the forest to get the water. So the bear saw him, and the hair stood up on the back of his neck. His nose went straight out, the nose became more pointed, and I knew he was going to get charged. And I called out, and Daniel saw him, and he ran that way, and the bear was towards him, but then the bear veered off, and he veered into the water. So, yeah, so it was kind
They
of
generally try and avoid conflict and avoid contacting people and each other, right? Like they'll put on a show, but they're like most wild animals, don't want to end up injured, and so will often put on a show but not actually want there to be contact at the end of it. So he was lucky in that case. I mean, I just wouldn't have walked into a situation like that in the first place, I don't think.
Yeah, he veered off.
Yeah,
I have a question about then food protection. What would you recommend?
Yeah, food protection, the barrels, if you have bear barrels, or stringing up in a tree properly, which is generally not done very well. I'm amazed that most kayak camping, we have left food just in our boats. It seems to be what everybody does, and I find that amazing and bad.
Do you know if bear bags work? They're made of kind of
like they're kind of like Kevlar ones or something. I've read about them, but I've never used one, and I don't have any experience with them. Yeah, I think we mostly have problems with things like raccoons and what's that I have? Cabbage and stuff. Yeah, little buggers with their little hands. They're so good at getting into things. Yeah, at the back. Is that you? Oh, is that Joe?
Yes, it is.
Good God, you're just straight blonde. I just didn't even recognize you.
Sorry, a point you brought up, but it's actually a question for Rich. How wild animals do not want to have that encounter with us for their own protection. However, today we were at Jordan River and observed a sea otter there, which was surprising right at Jordan River. And we observed it trying to jump up onto a
So this is
kayak
the one who's
and-
been down in Souk.
Well, I wondered if it was Ollie or not, but this one was literally attacking the kayakers. And
The kayakers or the surfers?
But it followed them. So the guy was he was back paddling, trying to get away from it, got away, but then there was two of them, two people in kayaks paddling, and we observed the sea otter literally following like a meter
What the heck's
behind.
going on?
And we saw the woman, like 2 hours later, and they'd managed to get around the point, past the campsite, land their kayaks, and they said they'd been fending off the sea otter the whole time. So,
Wow.
have you ever heard of behavior like this?
That it seems.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Sorry, and then later he actually did come out of the water. He came back into Jordan River, like into the river, and then came out on the log boom and up onto the sand. Or maybe just on the log boom. I'm not
bizarre.
sure.
I've seen that at 10 Mile Point.
Yeah.
Had one trying to climb on the back of the boat.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
They
I
wouldn't
mean,
be
it
like
was-
rescue otters that have been hand-fed at the aquarium and then released, or?
They release them where they catch them, so
I don't know. That I know that individual animals have very different personalities sometimes, and so this might just be a bit of a deranged one. I don't know. Right?
That's bizarre.
2 years ago, when there was a sea otter in Cadro Bay,
Yeah.
I was out at Cadro Point, and the sea otter was out there that day, and he actually tried to capsize me. He grabbed he grabbed my red bag, my throw bag, off the back deck, and just yarded on it. And so he came right up to the kayak, and apparently my eyes went pretty wide. But that
Yeah,
was,
and they're not small animals either.
Well,
30, 40 kilos that's a pretty big thing to be hoisting on your kayak.
I think this club has, because people in this club spend so much time in the water, I think like we have some of the wilder animal encounters that there are, because we also have all the club members who've been attacked by seals, which other people would say is like would never happen. So I think you're all bad luck.
Yeah, I'm not sure what would cause why an otter would be attacking people.
That's bizarre.
That would be I'd call it unnatural behavior.
Yeah.
Red bag looks like an urchin.
Yeah, full of urchins.
Helen, have you encountered any predatory black bears on the island?
I have never encountered a predatory black bear on Vancouver Island. I've never even been bluff charged in all of the bear stalking and everything I've done.
I haven't either. I know they exist.
They exist, generally in places where they haven't encountered people before.
Okay.
If there's going to be a predatory attack in British Columbia, it's generally a black bear, not a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
If it's a defensive attack, it's usually a grizzly bear. It can happen, but it's incredibly rare. You're much more, it's all the usual stats. You're much more likely to be hurt by your dog.
Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Is it an urban urban myth that a menstruating female
Thank you.
is a
What are you asking this crowd for?
Ooh, ouch, Berlin. I'm actually really glad you asked that. That actually, so, you know, I have a very large scientific literature collection, which started out as a paper, scientific literature collection. And the most photocopied paper I have is one on menstruation in bears and how there's no impact whatsoever of women menstruating on attractiveness to bears. I can detail in great depth what they did for that study, but it's really gross. But thank God, I think it was Lynn Rogers, decided like this was a question that had to be answered, and they went to all these bears in the dump and they fly fished past them, dragging past them used menstrual products and stuff, and they did all sorts of work seeing if there was any impact. It all kind of started, that myth, it started because there was 2 women who were attacked in Glacier Park. And I mean, you know, 25% of women at any time are menstruating, young women. And so, you know, obviously it actually doesn't take much to have 2 women attacked who are menstruating at the same time. And so it started with that, but basically, no. Not something to worry about.
I'd be more afraid of menstruating women attacking me.
And we'll leave it at that.
These guys live up island, and we should let them go so they can drive home in peace.
Yeah, has the storm hit yet? Because it's supposed to be super bad tonight.
This has been an outstanding presentation. I mean, you can tell by the number of questions this group has asked, and I've never seen them stick around this long. You guys won the audience over.
Fantastic questions. Those
Yes.
are some of the best questions I've actually ever had at a talk. Thank you. You can tell like how much you guys get out in nature.
This is a bunch of kayakers. Okay. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
I know what I'm going to take away from this is the next time I scare some little critter along the beaches or along the rocks, as I'm noodling the coast, I'm going to try to figure out what it is and looking at. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And next month in April is our AGM. It's an important meeting. We need as many people as we can to come out so that we can have a vote, because there may be some changes in a few categories. So we also have a really interesting presentation lined up for you. So pedal safe, drive safe, and we'll see everybody.